Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Billings Public Library. My name is Gavin Wilcher. I'm the director of this fine facility. Couple things. This program is being recorded, so I'm going to ask you to silence your cell phones for me, please.
It's happened. It's happened.
It is my great honor to introduce tonight's speaker. Peter Metzelaar was 7 years old when the Nazis stormed his family's home in Amsterdam and seized everyone except him and his mother. The Dutch underground contacted Klaus and Roefina Post on the Metzelaars' behalf, seeking a place of refuge for him and his mother. The Post risked their lives to shelter Peter and his mother on their small farm in northern Holland, where they remained in hiding for more than 2 years. Peter will share tonight his inspiring story of this experience, surviving the Nazi regime. You know, I've had the privilege to spend about 7 hours with Pete last night and this afternoon. I wish we had 6 hours to talk about this. I really do. And I want to challenge all of you, share what you hear here today. Share this with your families, with your teachers, share it with whomever, because these stories need to be told. These stories need to be reinforced. And we owe so much not to forget these stories. So please join me in welcoming Peter Metzelaar.
You showed me how to do this. The light doesn't come on. Well, thanks for coming, folks. It's No? There. Well, thank you so much, folks. It's a real pleasure being here. This is my first time. I'm from Seattle. It rains there occasionally. As a matter of fact, it was an hour and 20 minutes late. Yesterday, they actually had to de-ice the plane. Whoa. Anyhow, one of the things that I want to make clear is that everything that I'm going to be speaking of tonight is not something that I was told by parents or grandparents. I remember it, and it all happened between the ages of 6 and almost 11. And as many times as I've been doing this at various schools and venues, I walk through it in my mind each time. Because it's amazing to me that I remember as much as I do. And it only came about an event that I will be talking about in just a minute. One of the things that I always mention to adult groups is the fact that my PowerPoint has some pictures that are really not geared for adults, really more youngsters. A very quick example would be, I will be talking about when the Allied bombers came over from England to wipe out Hitler's war machine, and they happened to be underneath the flight path, the farm that Mom and I were hiding in. And when I tell the kids, you know, those were 4-engine bombers. They had propellers. They had what? Propellers. What are propellers? Well, anyway. So some of those things, like I say, bear with me. For example, the first slide, I always show, some of the kids may or may not know where the Netherlands or Holland is. It's, you know, needless to say, a very small country on the western slope of Europe. And the reason we have it enlarged, just to show that the entire eastern border of the Netherlands borders Germany. I've been told many times at the schools, where a lot of the kids will have a so-called unit on genocide, on the Holocaust, And I've had many times kids say, you know, I've heard that word. What exactly does that mean? Well, it has several definitions, but the main one is this: the total destruction of people by fire. It'll have a little bit more meaning later on. The Netherlands, prior to the Nazis occupying in May of 1940, only had approximately 9 million people in the entire country. Of that 9 million people, there were only about 140,000 people of the Jewish faith. By the end of the war, exactly 5 years later, of that 140,000, between 75 and 80% were murdered. It was only the second country per capita as to the percentage. Poland was the first, like 93%. So one of the things that I always like to do, and again, I don't have a choice, I have it on the PowerPoint, the kids get to hear about a lot of numbers. And I'm going to be talking about some numbers, and it's really hard to get your mind around those numbers if you really think about it. So I like to give an example, especially for the kids, and I'll consider you guys adults, but I'll go for the kid stuff. And that everybody is familiar with this horrible piece of American history of 9/11, when 3,000 innocent people lost their lives. To put a perspective, what Adolf Hitler and his Nazi regime did to the Jewish people, you take that horrible number of 3,000 and multiply it 2,000 times, and you come up with 6 million people that Adolf Hitler annihilated. And by the way, of that 6 million, 1.5 million kids, 10 years old and younger. 1.5 million. How do you put your mind around that? That number, and I have, of course, the fact that I do a lot of the talks in the state of Washington, and it turns out that from the standpoint of associating this terrible number, the entire state of Washington has 7 million people. So basically it's annihilating 90% of the entire state of Washington. I didn't know, my own ignorance. I looked up yesterday on the plane, and your beautiful state here has about 1.25 million. So you figure that almost 6 times the entire population of every city and town in the state of Montana is the number of Jewish people that were annihilated. The Germans, every time that they took over a country, they put over, at one particular time, 1935, some laws and regulations only to be abided by the Jewish people. They were referred to as the Nuremberg laws. I have a partial list of them. Don't bother even to read them all. Some of them are, if not all, ridiculous. When I show this to the kids, I said, yeah, put yourself in that position. No, not allowed to ride a bicycle. That's not allowed. Everybody is familiar, pretty much, that one of the requirements that Hitler imposed on every country that he occupied, that the Jewish people had to, at any time they left their home, their living quarters, sew on a bright yellow star on their outer garment. Within that star, in what I would call Hebraic style of lettering, it spelled the word Jew. If you were in France, it would say Juf. In Germany, it would say Jude. And in the Netherlands, it said Jood, J-O-O-D. Now, not only adults, but kids down to the age of 6 had to wear that star. And I'm going to just, I might as well, bald as I am. Look at all the hair, that's me. Anyway, There was a lot more lost than just the hair, I can assure you. It was in the middle 80s. My mom was still living down south. And on one of my visits, I found a box of old photographs. And amongst those photographs was a picture of her when she was in her middle 20s, early 20s. And as you will see in a minute, she's wearing a coat, and you can see one of these stars sewn onto that coat. When I flipped the picture over, there was a crumbling piece of paper. And when I opened it up, there was one of these stars. I said, "Mom, where did you get this?" She says, "I don't want to hear about this." I, at the end of the war, just ripped it off my coat, the memory of everything that took place at that time. This is a picture of Mom. This star is this star. It's not a replica. It is the actual star that came off the coat. In Seattle, we have a museum and a center, Holocaust Center. I donated that picture to them over there. Mom, Dad, and I, we lived in an old 4-story walk-up building, the kind of buildings you see in New York City, the so-called brownstones. And one of the first things that I remember looking out the window and seeing people being rounded up by soldiers. I had no idea. What's that all about? I mean, I'm a little over 6 years old. I have no idea. And then a lot of these people were put on trucks, and somebody's aunt, uncle, father, mother, brother, or sister didn't come home that night. What happened to them? Did not know what happened to them. Did not know. An incident that happened, and I always preface it by saying that I'm not trying to be, I don't know what the word is, on stage, but I'm going to get a little loud in just a second because of a particular event, and the only reason that I'm doing that because that is how an event I remember. That it was one night we were still in the apartment, and it must have been after midnight, 10 o'clock at night, I don't know, and trucks pulled up to the front of the apartment complex. And I will never, ever forget, in the quiet of the night, these German soldiers yelling at the top of their lungs, "Alle Juden, raus! All Jews, out!" It was followed by doors being kicked in, babies crying, women screaming. They hadn't come to our door yet. Who knows why? But the next day in school, some of my friends were gone. Yeah, probably on vacation, right? Had a cold, I don't know. As time went on, more and more the kids disappeared. And then one day my mom sat me down. She was very sad, and she said, "Uncle Leo and Aunt Katie have been arrested." What do you mean arrested? How do you explain that to a 6-year-old? It wasn't much later, matter of fact, just a couple of weeks later, that Mom, again, very upset, and he said, "Oma and Opa, Grandpa and Grandma have been arrested. They're taken away." What do you mean arrested? Again, how does a mother explain that to a kid? Or even an adult for that matter. I don't know what she said. It has to do with those soldiers out there. And then came the day that Mom was just coming unglued. And she sat me down, put her arm around me. And she said, "Dad has been arrested. He's been taken away." My dad used to like to fish. And he had a little 2-man rowboat. By the way, amongst those Nuremberg laws, one of them said that a Jewish person could not own a boat, if you want to call that a boat. He went fishing on one of the canals. That was not allowed. That was in June of 1942. And that's the last that we ever saw or heard of him again. More and more people started to disappear. Nobody knew what happened to them. They just disappeared. They didn't come home. Like in every country, you have good, you have bad. You got good religion, you got bad religious people, you got a little of everything. No different in the Netherlands, and there were some individuals who could care less that those people were called Jews, or that they belonged to the Jewish faith. Their attitude was, who are these Germans coming across our border taking our citizens away? A humanity type of attitude. Who are they taking and where are they taking them to? So they formed a very loosely knit underground, if you want to call it. And when I say underground, 2 people in one block, somebody else in another block. And what did they do? They would find food for the Jewish people, because when the Germans occupied the Netherlands, they took over all of the food production for the German military. And the citizens were giving stamps to buy food, but the Jewish people were not. So these guys, gals, whoever they were, somehow would get food. Or change identity. As you saw in the previous picture, looking at identity, everybody had to have an identification, and the Jewish people had a big J on their ID. And so they did some of that. Whatever they could do to help. Very secretly, if they'd ever get caught, they'd be shot in the head on the spot, no questions asked. And one of the things that they did, what was probably the most important thing, and how, I have no idea, that they would find people or a person that would be willing to shield, hide, shelter, whatever you want to call it, a Jewish person or persons. How my mother, and this is going to come up several times during my story, I could never understand how she found these people, because it's not something that you looked up in the yellow pages. I'm sorry, yellow pages? They still have that? When I mentioned that to my sons, yellow pages, are you kidding me? It was all secret, very, very secretive done. And so my mom found one of these people, and they found a middle-aged couple, Klaus and Roefina Post. They were 2 farmers in the province of Friesland, in the northern part of the Netherlands, that were willing to shelter us. When we came to that farm, I recall it was a very, very old building. And when I say a farm, they had a couple of pigs, a couple of cows, a couple of chickens, and maybe a half an acre of growing veggies. The building was very, very old. And as I will show you in the picture, Klaus and Roefina looked much older than they really were, only showing that they worked their hands to the bone every day just to feed themselves. This is an actual picture of the little farm. Klaus and Roefina, I have to say, I don't know, at the time they might have been in their late 50s. They look older than that. And the thing that amazed me, that just so amazed me, not only, keep in mind, they'd never heard of us. We'd never heard of them. And on this little bitty farm, working their fingers from sunup to sunset, that they would share those meager halves. It was a Christian family, whatever their beliefs were. They were willing to share those meager halves with 2 total strangers. The Germans started to find out in a hurry that Jews were being hidden on the farmland. Now the trucks started to coming with a dozen soldiers on each truck, and they started to ransack all of the farms in the area, kicking over furniture, with fixed bayonets, sometimes stabbing into a haystack where a kid or an adult was hiding. They got them out, got on a truck. When they left, who knows what happened to them? Nobody did. So one day class came up to me, had an interesting idea. This farm was quite old. And when I say old, it had no plumbing, had to go to the bathroom to an outhouse. It had no electricity. When Mom and I got to that farm, it was even then probably already 40 years old. Who knows? The entire floor of that farm was knotty pine, 12-inch knotty pine. And Klaus did an interesting thing. He took a saw in the joint of two of those 12-inch planks and cut a section, two 12 inches apart, 6 feet. When he opened it up, the two 12-inch sections was the dirt of this farm. And I mean dirt, old dirt. Now, when Mom and I heard the trucks coming down the dirt road, we'd run into this little room, open up this plank, and Mom and I would jump in there, sitting in there, body to body, barely able to breathe. Either Klaus or Roefina would put the boards back, throw a rug on it, couldn't see anything. I don't know how many times the occurrence happened, but numerous times Mom and I would lay in there in this hole underneath the floorboards where the soldiers were ransacking, looking, walking 1.5 feet above my head. All it would have taken is one cough, one sneeze, one hiccup would have been all over. Even that got to be too dangerous. The raids became more frequent. Next to the farm, only a couple of 100 feet, was a little forest. You can't even call it forest. Might have been a half an acre of trees. And one day, Klaus told me to get a wheelbarrow and a couple of shovels. And he did so at dusk. Okay, dusk, of course, being when the sun set down. My mom and I were on this little farm for a little over 2.5 years. Feature this. Within that 2.5 years, there was not a single time that either Mom nor I could come outside during daylight hours. Never. Only when it started to get dark, away from the dirt road in the back. The reason, of course, being there are other farms in the area. And as I mentioned, every country has got good and bad. People get used to each other and seeing who they are. And if for any reason my mom and I would have come out during daylight hours, somebody might say, hey, who are they? We don't exist. We don't have a body. We don't have a soul. We don't exist, because the minute that we think we are, I don't know, we're liable to have a truck pulling up and some soldiers arresting us. We had to always stay inside. So he told me to get this at dusk, this wheelbarrow, and we go into this little forest. We started, there's a little rise in the area, started to dig. And after a couple of days at dusk, in the semi-darkness, we ended up with a little cave, a hole in the ground, maybe 3 feet wide, 3 feet tall, 6 feet deep. Klaus went out of the area, cut down some small trees, and put it over the top of that hole, just randomly, like a roof, if you will. Took the branches and interwove them in the front. You could stand right in front of it. You couldn't see anything. It just blended in with nature. So now, when we heard the trucks, Mom and I would run out the back of the farm. We'd crawl in this hole, had to separate these twigs, crawl in there. Just enough room for the two of us, body to body, barely able to go in there. We couldn't see out. There were two things that scared the you-know-what out of me. The one was every time that we crawled into this hole, dirt came trickling down. I was always scared to death this was going to cave in on us. But the thing that scared me more than anything else, by this time, going on 7 years old, I know that somebody wants to do terrible things to me. Somebody wants to, I don't know, something terrible. I don't understand it. I don't know why. And the thing that scared me more than anything, laying in this cave, being only a couple 100 feet from the farm, I could hear them ransacking the farm, the Germans, looking, but I couldn't see them. I could hear them. I couldn't see them because of the twigs in the front. And the thing that scared me more than anything is that this time they're going to come and get me. What did I do? Where's Dad? What are we doing in this hole? I didn't understand. I heard them. Are they coming? Well, I'm standing in front of you. They never did come into that part of the forest. It was in the latter part, 1943, that the Allies, predominantly at the time the British and the Americans, started to run bombing raids over to Germany, coming from England in what we know were all you smart guys. What kind of planes did they fly? Yeah. A B-17. They would come over in groups, formations from 800, 900 at the time. The drone of those aircraft was deafening, probably because of the propellers. The what? The propeller. They were escorted by fighters. When they came over, it was just coincidence that on their way from England to bomb Germany, we just happened to be underneath the flight path. It was just coincidence that they just came over that way. Well, when they came over, it was unbelievable. Scary. I have learned a little bit more about this aircraft in Seattle. If any of you ever been there, there's a very beautiful, large museum called the Museum of Flight. And I'm a docent there, a volunteer there. And it was an interesting thing. I always liked aviation. I never learned to fly. I just liked airplanes. And one day at the YMCA, my wife meets somebody who was a docent over there. And she happened to mention that Pete likes airplanes. She says, why don't have him call? And she gave the name of the person, the director. They have a training course at the Museum of Flight. So I called up, and the lady that answered, who was in charge, said, what's your background? And I told her. She says, we just finished the class. It's a 9-week class on Saturdays. And we'll have another one in a month and a half. We'd like to interview you beforehand, blah, blah, blah. She says, however, the summer is coming up. And if you don't mind coming down for a couple of days training, we need some people to give tours on the B-17 bomber. So I did that, yeah. So I can tell you, that was an incredible machine, a crew of 9. The Boeing Corporation and its affiliates built 13,000 of them. If you can just picture this, by the end of the war, the statistics are that just those planes, you can just about say, were the beginning of the end, the capitulation of Nazi Germany. They dropped 865,000 tons of bombs on Germany. Many of them got shot down. Over a third were lost in combat. When they got shot up, something bad, the majority of the crew didn't get out. I can assure you, I was inside there, the room in there. It's unbelievable. To curtail some of that material loss and human loss, the command in England decided to run those raids at night. It was on one of those first night runs that I could hear them coming. The windows started to rattle, the ground shook, and I got petrified. So much so, I had to go to the bathroom, something terrible. But with all this racket, I was too afraid to go out there by myself in the dark. So I asked my mom to take me, which she did. We stepped outside of the farm. We're standing in the gravel, the dirt. The noise, the drone of those bombers overhead was deafening. You looked up, couldn't see anything. And then a strange thing happened. My mom had a little flashlight. And just to help me not to trip over my own 2 feet in the dark, she took the flashlight and turned it on. And when she did, I smacked her in the abdomen with full force. She doubled up. Many years later, we laughed about it. It wasn't funny at the time, and what in the heck was that all about? Well, we've all gone through childhood, and even as adult, many times when we, excuse me, when we fear, have an extreme fear, the mind does funny things. It either over-exaggerates the situation or, I don't know if that's even a word, under-exaggerates. Your mind tries to protect you. And what that was, when my mom turned on the flashlight just to help me, and I hit her, I was so petrified that when she turned on the light, I was convinced a bomb was going to come right down that flashlight. All the crazy, all of the crazy stuff. Anyway, Mom and I were on this farm for a little over 2.5 years. The raids became more frequent. Klaus and Roefina, they were terrific. Klaus became almost like a surrogate dad to me. And in her wisdom, Mom decided we got to get out of here. It's just going to be a matter of time, and we are going to get caught. And not only would that be the end of us, but the fact that these 2 wonderful people sheltered us, it would be the end of them and their entire family. The Germans would send them to a concentration camp the next day. They would be executed. So Mom decided, we should try and find another place. Even on the farm, how she found one of these so-called underground people, I have no idea. I just don't know. But she did, and they came up with a couple of women in the city of The Hague. The Hague, of course, is the seat of government in the Netherlands, and there were 2 women living in a 4-story walk-up apartment, and they would let us use one of the rooms. We weren't there a very long time, and I could see a total difference. And what I mean to say by that is, on the farm, we were never hungry. We had the compassion of 2 understanding people, kind people. Those women that gave us shelter, they wouldn't share their stamps to get food. Of course, how would we get it? They, anytime that there was they wouldn't share some of the food. There were at least 3 times that I recall, times that at night my mom would disappear for an hour, and she'd come back with a loaf of bread. Don't ask. I don't know. I don't know where she got it. Those women wouldn't share that. In addition, if there was any dirty work to be done, if you will, they asked Mom to do it, cleaning the floors, the bathroom, and there was hardly any communication. Hardly any communication. And it was like Klaus and Roefina were like a family. But, we still had to be appreciative. After all, they did give us shelter. We were there for, a couple of months. And then my mom came up with a dirty word. You wouldn't think of a mother doing that, but a word that I hadn't heard for over 2.5 years, and that was, Peter, you haven't been to school. To school. I can't go to school. I'm one of them. She says, I got false papers for you through the underground. She says, on your papers, if you ever get stopped, instead of Peter Metzelaar, AA, you're now Peter Pelt. It was with that name, that new last name, that I went to a public school, one of the most frightening parts of my history. By this time, I'm totally aware that people want to kill me and my mother and assumed some terrible things happened to the rest of the family. And now the star comes off and I go to a public school. Again, what I mentioned before, what the mind does, when I went to the school for, I don't know, first several weeks, I felt that every kid said, hey, there he goes, there's one of those. I didn't know who the heck I was. I was just one of the guys. But in my mind, I was so used to don't exist. It was the first quarter or semester, I don't know what it was, and we got grades. I always have fun with this with the kids. I have to relate that to you. Needless to say, we didn't have computers, and I asked the kids, don't you guys get your grades? You know, you get printouts, right? Computer printout. Yeah. Well, there were no computers in those days. And in the Netherlands, they had a booklet, a rapportboekje, a rapportboekje. I still have it, the original one. It is fading, but it still has the name Peter Peld on there. And the one thing that I always point out to the kids, I said, you notice another difference. I said, the grades we got were numerical. Not like you guys at A, B's, and C's. I'm so sorry. I don't mean to imply anybody gets C's here. Everybody gets A's and B's. And I always hear, oh, always hear this Rome. Anyway, there are a couple of 5s on there, which I think was like a F minus or something like that. It had to do with behavior and neatness. I was a slob. The very fact that I wanted to be anonymous, I probably blew that because I I didn't behave very well. I was always afraid. Well, one of the things that a lot of people may or may not be familiar with, Nazi Germany had a young student at the time, a very brilliant man by the name of Werner von Braun. When he was 21 years old, he got his PhD in physics. And he and a bunch of scientists developed the first rocket for war purposes in the world. It was called a V-2 rocket, not a jet, a rocket. It stood 65 feet tall. It was fired from the entire west coast, from every country, the west coast of Europe, over to England, where the bombers came from. It was not very accurate. Many of them did not land in military bases. And again, statistics show by the end of the war, many thousands of Brits got killed by that particular machine. I have a picture of both. This is a V-2 being fired up. And here you have Dr. Werner von Braun in front of the butchers. Yeah, the butchers, I call them that. Now the thing that so many people, certainly the kids, at the end of the war, the United States, the Soviet Union, Great Britain, and France tried to apprehend as many of the butchers, the generals, the politicians, at least those, to put them on trial for crimes against humanity, at least those that had not already escaped to South America, many of them to the United States and Canada. But when it came to Dr. Werner von Braun and 500 of his scientists, the United States says, come on over. We can use you. We will not prosecute. First, he's a Nazi, killing or being responsible for the killing of many people. And then the United States says, come on over. You can look this up on Google. It's called Operation Paperclip. And the reason it was Paperclip, because when they got in, before they came to the United States, the scientists were actually put a paperclip on the lapels because they were coming to the United States. Well, let's not stop here. It was this former Nazi, or whatever you want to call him, and his scientist that put the United States on the moon. It was he and his scientist that developed, up until last week, the most powerful rocket ever built, called the Saturn V rocket. And yes, it was he was responsible in June of 1969 to put the United States on the moon. Well, the Brits, of course, were not overly thrilled with those rockets coming over. And they had their so-called Lancasters bombers trying to wipe out the launching facilities, which was a task in and of itself, because many of these launches were on the back of railroad cars, and the Germans moved them around. But they made the best. They would send fighters over before, and the Germans, like all cowards, put their anti-aircraft defensive against these things right in the middle of the city, on rooftops. Before the bombers came, the fighters came, and they would have over the city, trying to wipe these things out, prepare them for the bombers. They would have dogfights. The German Air Force, called the Luftwaffe, would intercept them, and there would be dogfights. Well, you know, especially to a young person, what's a dogfight? The Red Baron, yeah, that was World War I, right? Today, we don't hear much about dogfights in modern warfare. Today, you got a sophisticated machine capable of 2,000 miles an hour with a highly trained pilot. All he does is hit a button. Some ammo leaves his wingtips, and 100 miles or who knows how far, a bunch of people get their brains blown out. Some for the good, some not. But that didn't exist then. They would have dogfights that could last from 20 minutes to 40 minutes. It was on a Sunday afternoon. This apartment that these ladies lived in that gave us shelter was only about a block from the park. And my mom got courageous. Of course, I wasn't wearing the star anymore. She took her star off to get some fresh air and go into the park. We no sooner get to the park and the air raid siren sounded, meaning the Brits are on the way over. The Germans going to intercept, and all you know what is going to break loose. Everybody ran into these underground concrete bomb air raid shelters. Stinky, smelly facilities, but it kept you safe. You could hear bombs exploding, the rat-a-tat of machine guns. And like I say, it could last anywhere from 20 minutes to 40 minutes. Here is something that I was like talking about, especially with the kids. In the United States, we're familiar with the youngsters. We have such things as trading cards. National Hockey League, the NBA, the NFL. Hey, Charlie, I'll trade you ho for ha, whatever. No such thing existed in Europe. But leave it up to us crazy guys. And I mean us crazy guys, I was one, because the girls wouldn't be that stupid to do this. And that was after those dogfights. You could walk on the street and you could find pieces of shrapnel, exploded piece of ammunition, anti-aircraft ammunition. You could find these on the street. They were nasty, jagged-looking pieces of steel, and the guys used to trade them. The next day in school, hey, Charlie, look at this funny one. I'll trade you for the two. Are you kidding me? Exploded ammunition. This Sunday, after the all clear sounded, Mom and I came out of the bomb shelter. It's Sunday. School the next day. I'm walking. I'm looking for shrapnel to trade. Walked for just a few minutes, and I'm looking ahead about 25 feet, And folks, there's a piece of shrapnel the likes I have never seen before. It was it was like 3 times bigger than these 3 put together. Nasty looking thing. All I could think of, I got to get this sucker. Because if somebody wants to trade me for that, they'd have to give me everything. Nobody'd ever seen anything like that. This was just, I'm going to be a big shot. I pull away from Mom. I run over. Of all the stupid things to remember, I had red knobby gloves. I remember they were red gloves. They had little knobbies. I don't know why. And I picked this thing up. It took 2 hands to pick it up. I picked it up. I'm going to be a big shot. As I picked it up, it was heavy. And the other thing that I noticed, heat. Heat came through my gloves. Who cares? I'm going to be a big shot. I was so proud of that thing. And I show it to Mom, and she takes one look at it. And I don't know what took place in her mind. She takes her hand underneath mine, makes me heave this thing away. 5 seconds later, there's an explosion. There's a 10 by 10 in the street, a crater. I've no idea what it was I picked up. Whatever it was live. It exploded. My only regret was I wasn't going to be a big shot in school the next day. I would not be talking to you folks here either. So the Germans had a conference in a city south of Berlin called 1C, W-A-N-S-E-E. He called the 1C conference where he brought together some of the higher-ups. In 1 hour and 20 minutes of that meeting, they came up with today in the history books are referred to as the final solution, how to eradicate every person of the Jewish faith from Europe and then the world. When that happened, those raids became almost daily. How my mother, this is probably a question that I ask more than any other question, how she found out, maybe she just forgot, I don't know. But she found out that these women, because of those increased raids, got scared that we would get caught. And that, of course, would be the end of them and their family for giving us shelter. So Mom found out they were going to turn us in. We had to get out of there. How do we get out? Where do we go? Come with the underground again. And they found a one-room apartment back in Amsterdam where we started. In the city of Amsterdam and The Hague, it's probably only 45 miles, not very far. In those days, there was only one highway connecting the 2 cities. However, no civilians allowed, let alone who we were. It was used strictly for German convoys. No bicycles. Can you imagine Holland? No bicycles. No civilians allowed. I wake up one night, and my mother is sitting at a little table with a candle, what looked to me like a bunch of bed sheets, and she's sewing. I said, "What are you doing?" She says, "Go to sleep." I wake up another couple hours later, and here she is finishing up from those bed sheets, and she made a skirt. She made a top with some buttons. And she made a little hat with cardboard in and wrapped it in this white sheet material. She made a nurse's uniform. I said, "What are you doing?" She says, "Get up, get dressed. We got to get out of here." She bundled me up, it was wintertime, bundled herself up and wrapped this contraption that she sewed around herself, and we tippy-toed out of the apartment. We had no belongings. We're trudging through the snow, looking at every corner, make sure there wasn't anybody because there was a curfew, and let alone again who we were. As we walk for a while, now I'm getting to be 10 years old, and all of a sudden I realized something. I said, Mom, we're not going to this highway, are we? She says, Peter, we got to get to Amsterdam. I said, you can't do that. It's the German military. It's the representative of the people that want to kill us. We can't go there. She says, quiet, don't talk anymore. As the sun came up, we had walked, 2-3 miles in the snow. I could see in the distance troops marching, German troops. Flatbed trucks with tanks on them. I got petrified. As we get closer and see all this German might that represented end of life for me, all of a sudden, Mom does something, and as the expression goes, I'll be kind, I know the doo-doo is going to hit the fan. Mom goes sideways, and she starts to hitchhike. I said, what are you doing? Don't talk. It wasn't much after that a flatbed truck stopped, and an SS officer gets out. The SS was the worst of the worst. The black uniforms, the skulls on their caps, the camp guards, etc., etc., etc. This guy gets out and starts to read my mother the riot act. Now I have to tell you that originally my mother was born in Vienna, Austria. She came to the Netherlands when she was 19, married my dad. So she spoke and understood German. And this officer starts to read the riot act. What are you doing here with a child? No civilians allowed. This is for the fatherland. Blah, 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 blah. I have no idea why this guy even would have her give an answer. But her answer was this. She says, sir, you know about the British bombing the rocket sites? Ja. Ich weiß es das. I know that. So? She says, well, just a few days ago, one of the British bombs went astray. It hit the apartment house the kid here, pointing at me, was living. And it killed his father, and it killed his mother. As you can see, I'm a nurse for the International Red Cross, and I'm taking him to an orphanage in Amsterdam. The guy gave her a look. He grabbed her by the arm, walks her over to the truck. I'm hanging on to her for dear life. She is my only security. And now he separates me from my mom. I don't know what's going to happen. He walks my mom, he walks Mom over to the cab of the truck. The other Nazi officer, the driver, was still in there. And he helps my mom into the truck, into the cab. He comes over to me, and I thought, okay, this is the end. He doesn't say a word. He picks me up, puts me in the back of this flatbed truck. He walks over to the cab of the truck. I am sitting in the snow by myself. Mom is sitting between the SS officers, and they took us to Amsterdam. They took us. She fooled them. How did she come up with this idea? How did she come up with this idea? I mean, unbelievable. They took it. The guys that represent our death took us to where we wanted to go. Oh, well. Well, when we got to Amsterdam, for those of you who may have been there, it's an old city. Used to have, in all the canals, trees everywhere, but there wasn't a tree left standing. Because one of the things, too, any coal production, the Germans confiscated that for the military. People were freezing to death. Food was almost unheard of. If you had a pot, and if you had a fire, if you could boil some water and take a turnip and dip it in and call it soup, you'd be very lucky. It was not very far from this one-room apartment that the underground got for us. that there was a high school, an old high school that the Germans took over as one headquarters among several in Amsterdam. Well, one day the Brits came over and leveled the place. The results of that, of course, was a block of rubble, amongst rubble, being the fact that it's an old school, splintered wood. Gold! It was gold to get some wood. The next day, hundreds of people, me included, with a gunny sack, with a chisel, a saw, whatever, people picking up all that beautiful, beautiful wood. I don't know how long it was, maybe 15 minutes. I was loading in the bag where I could and all these other people. And all of a sudden, everybody gets up and runs away. I did too. I didn't know why. People started to hide in the neighborhood. Turned out there were some German officers coming down and, to see what used to be one of their headquarters, don't get caught. Well, people were desperate. After these after these guys passed, everybody went back. I did too. It was probably, again, not more than 10, 15 minutes later, and the same thing happened. Everybody got up and ran away. Not everybody. I guess I was too busy on a juicy 2x4 or whatever it was. I didn't see the people going away. And I looked up and I recognized a woman that lived right next to the apartment. And as she is running away, she's telling me to run as she is running away. And I said, what? And I stand up as she is running away, and all of a sudden I'm grabbed by the collar, and I'm dangling on the fist of this German officer. Well, I remember, as I mentioned, when we were on the farm, I was never hungry. But those 8-9 months that we were in the city of The Hague, I was starving. I was skinny legs, underdeveloped, what have you. And I'm dangling on one fist of this Nazi officer. He reaches in his belt and he pulls out a gun, a revolver, whatever it was, and puts it to my head and says, I'll give you 10 seconds. Oh, come on. A little scared kid, a soldier, having fun with a little kid. He never shot. He dropped me. And I can tell you with my undernourished legs, I could have won the Olympic gold in the mile, the 2 miles, the 10 miles. You never saw a kid running so fast in your life. The sad part about all of that was the neighbor that saw this guy grabbing me runs over to Mom's apartment, knocks on the door, and said, Ellie, I'm so sorry. I have to tell you this. I just saw it. They got Peter. After everything that she had to go through, the only thing that she was still alive for me, I had no siblings. And now to be told that I'm a goner. Well, I made it worse because when that guy dropped me, I was smart enough not to go straight home. I was too afraid to be followed. So I went through people's backyards and alleys and whatever instead of getting back, in 10 minutes. It took me, 20 minutes. I knocked on Mom's door. She opened up and she was still hysterical. I always remind my wife, I don't remember that I've ever been squeezed so hard in my life as she did, as Mom did, recognizing that in fact we were still alive. It was in May 5th, 1945, that the Canadians liberated the Netherlands. The war was over. Nobody in my family returned. Mom and I were the only survivors. We stayed in the Netherlands another 4 years, trying to get up to some kind of normalcy without family. And as I always like to point out to the kids, it is a horrible, horrible thing if freedom is taken away from you. But when it is taken away and you get it back, it's not a light switch. It's not a light switch. It's not whoop-de-doo. Yeah, you're happy. But after all these years, can I really go play soccer with friends? Do I have to see who is seeing me? It took a long time to undo, in effect, what has been so indoctrinated, if you will. We stayed in the Netherlands for another 4 years. And when I was 13 and a half, we came to America. We were first in New York. My mom had a friend. You know, laws were all different from the standpoint of a visa and all of that stuff. I spoke no English. And I have to relate to that. When we came to New York, there was a polio epidemic in 1949. So my mom, how did she, of course, money wasn't what it is then, and I don't know what she had, but she sent me to a summer camp in the White Mountains in New Hampshire for 30 days. And like I say, I didn't speak any English, but, you know, kids amongst themselves playing and what have you, you learn more than probably in a book, in a class. And the thing that I remember, it wasn't funny at the time, but we used to side up every day amongst the other activities and have a baseball game. I never played baseball. I played soccer. And then somebody explained the game to me. Now put yourself in this position. They explained what baseball is. There is a guy with a wooden stick, and he has to hit this ball. But the guy that is throwing that ball doesn't want him to hit it. Now, wait a minute. He doesn't want him to hit it, yet this guy has it. Well, every time, by the time I got any idea about the game, I'd strike out all the time. And I was so embarrassed, and just to save face, I remember the one time telling the captain or whoever the kid was, I said, I'm getting badder and badder. He says, you're not getting better, you're getting worse. I said, no, I'm bad, I'm really getting badder. I mean, that was my, that was the extent of my English. Well, we came to the West Coast, and here's something that I love to have some senior folks here. Do any of, and just shake your head, maybe, the younger people never heard of this. In those days, the shoe manufacturers used to make shoes with a spongy sole. It was called crepe soles. They were very quiet, very spongy. And one day, now by this time I've been in the United States, not quite a year yet, and I come to class and I was late. The bell had rung. This was in the 8th grade, 9th grade. And as I walk in, the teacher, all the kids are in the class, and the teacher says to me, Peter, you may not be used to it quite, I understand, but you have to be in your seat when the bell rings. But she says, I appreciate you not disturbing the rest of us by coming in so quietly. I said, it's because of the crap on my shoes. All sounded the same to me. Crap, crepe, whatever, Anyway, I never talked much about my experience. People knew from Holland, knew I lost some family, never went into much detail. Even then, by this time I'm 15, almost starting high school, and even then, why go into all the details? Doesn't every kid go through this? I don't think so. But all of that changed. At my age, not that terribly long ago, although it seems longer and longer now, and that was in October of 1992. I had gone to my basic education in the United States. I was in the U.S. Army. I was just a regular guy. And when all of this happened, my middle son and his wife was hired by some company. Anyway, he had to move from Washington State to Brussels. out, outside of Brussels in Belgium. And it was in October of 92 that he called me up and said, Dad, why don't you guys come out here for the holidays? Oh my gosh, I had never been back to the Netherlands. Still spoke the language ever so little because my mom, as I mentioned, she was born in Vienna, then lived in the Netherlands. And I wanted to keep the Dutch, which is a terrible language. I wanted to keep it going, and I would speak Dutch to her, and she would answer me in this German-Dutch accent in English. She wouldn't talk Dutch to me. She wanted to just leave that life behind, you know. So I was really excited about being invited, going to Europe for the first time. And then something that I had thought about for all of these years. Whatever happens to that little farm in Klaus and Roefina, those dear, beautiful people that saved my life. And then I got this sick feeling. Don't have a clue what town, what village, don't have any idea where that was. My mom was quite ill at the time. She was in a nursing home, and I asked her, and she didn't remember. And then she came up with a funny name, the Fijneburen. And when she mentioned that name, I said, that was the dirt road the farm was on. Great. Give me more. What am I going to do? Go to a foreign country and ask them about the dirt road? I mean, come on. She didn't know. I went to the the library, got an atlas out. Excuse me. Looked at all these strange names, and nothing jumped at me. There was one name, Mackinga. And the more I looked at it, I don't know why I looked at it, not really. And I even asked Mom, were we in a town called Mackinga? Nah. That's all we had to go on. Went to Europe, spent a week in Belgium. By the way, how many have you been to Belgium, to Brussels? You know, I don't know if it's still that way, but when you go down to the underground, they have these little stands, and the Belgian waffles in Belgium are really, really good. They really are. I mean, they're like hot dogs for our hot dog stands, I guess. Anyway, after we spent a week, we got in the car, and the distance, needless to say, in Europe are not what they are here. You know, from Brussels to Amsterdam, if I recall, it's only about a 2.5-hour drive. And we drove, my daughter-in-law, my son, my wife and I, we drove. And when we got into the Netherlands, I got a big kick. I could still read and understand advertising. And when we were downtown in Amsterdam, the only thing I did not remember being there was the Golden Arches. They were there when we came. They were not there in the 40s. And we just became tourists. We took the canal tour. We went to the Van Gogh and the Rijksmuseum. And, of course, we visited and went through the Anne Frank house. By the way, for some of you, no doubt through your kids or whatever, familiar with Anne Frank, is probably the most famous Jewish kid that wrote a diary. I think it's one of the most published in all languages throughout the world. And she and 7 of her family were hidden in the attic behind the stairway. Make a long story short, they got arrested. And she, amongst other camps, was sent to a camp called Bergen-Belsen, where 2 weeks before liberation, she died of typhoid fever. To this day, I read an article about a month and a half ago, there's still an older FBI agent who is trying to find out who betrayed the family. They still don't know for sure. Well, anyway, after we spent a couple of days in Amsterdam, was a big thrill. And then I told my son, I said, you know, this Mackinga really doesn't mean anything. I said, it's another hour and a half. Hey, we're here, let's do it. We drive up the highway and we see this little sign called Mackinga. Okay, we pull off the highway And as soon as we're off the highway, it's this quaint village, you might call it. And we drove about 2 blocks, and there was a small bank on the corner. I mean, it's called Robo Bank. And I told my son who was driving, I says, pull up in there. I says, watch your dad make a jerk of himself. He's going to ask some crazy question. We pull in there. The 4 of us get out. A lady says, can I help you? I said, you know, we're from the United States. And I said, I don't know how to say this, but have you ever heard of a dirt road called the Feyenoord? And I'm ready to. She says, sir, of course. She says, it's about 5 minutes from here. I said, no. Oh, my gosh. That was such an emotional thing. I mean, the 4 of us, we were hugging, we were crying, having found a place we didn't even know where in the heck we were. In my case, going back into my history of almost 60 years, I mean, we were making a racket. The manager came out. He probably thought it was a holdup or something. Anyway, he asked us to come into his office, and I very briefly told him what we're there for. And he got a very pensive look on his face, maybe anticipating something I was going to ask. And I said, have you ever heard of the Klaus and Roefina Post family? He says, of course I have. I said, no. I said, how did you know them? He says, well, my predecessor manager introduced me. They used to bank here. Not that I anticipated anything. They'd be 130 years old. I said, what happened to them? He says, well, now keep in mind this is in the fall of 92. They passed away in 81. And as many times as I've told that story, it just it gets me every time. Why didn't I go back sooner? Give him a hug. Thank you for saving my life. So the guy says, the farm is still there. He says, I don't know if you knew the people or not. He says, I'm sure it's a little different, but whoever's there, I'm sure they'll let you look around. And he made a little diagram, and sure enough, we go up this dirt road, and my son again was driving, and I said, oh my God, there it is. I recognize the farm. I mean, new paint, new roof, new barns, more foliage. I mean, almost 60 years. So I knocked on the door. I was hoping to go. Nobody was home. I was sick. I wanted to go inside and go in that room to see if those boards were still on the floor where we hid underneath. But this was in first week in December of 92, and it was snowy, snow on the ground. And after we walked around there, that farm, so weird, I felt like I was 8 years old again. It's the strangest feeling. Walked in the back of the farm where Klaus had built me little toys that I could play with at dusk. I mean, it was just the strangest feeling. And then I said, the trees are empty now. I said, I want to go into that little forest to see if there's still a remnant of the cave that I helped build, where Mom and I hid in so many times. We go into this little forest, and I don't know why, but we split up. I go one way, my family goes another way. And every time that I see a dead tree stump or something, I kind of step on the ground, see if there's some softness. You know, maybe this is where the cave was. We didn't walk around there for 10 minutes. And about 40 feet away, my son calls out, Dad, come here. I found it. And folks, there was a cave like I left it 60 years ago. It did not have the twigs in the front anymore, of course. I had a little screwdriver on my keychain, and I carved Mom and my initials in here. My gosh, after all of these years, that was still there. It was just remarkable. We drove back that night, drove back to Brussels, and something that I had asked, I had told family that over the years. And they all said, what are you, some kind of a nut? I said, yeah, just ask my wife. And that was that if I ever had the opportunity, I wanted to visit the site of a death camp. And after we got back to Brussels, my son made some arrangements. And we flew on LOT Airlines, L-O-T, the Polish national airline. And we flew to this beautiful, beautiful medieval town called Krakow. 1,012 years old, just absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. However, a 25-minute drive, and forgive me, this is just how I feel. Some of you may not use the language, but I'm going to use it. Another 25 minutes we drove until we got to the largest, the most inhumane piece of hell that man ever created for man, called Auschwitz-Birkenau. This was a camp that covered 15 square miles. The railroad tracks coming from all over Europe are still there. The history books will always show this picture. All of the trains went through this tunnel. On one of the entrances, it's still the original. Arbeit macht frei. Work sets you free. Yeah, right. The trains that came from Europe, I mean cattle cars, not trains, depending on where those people were arrested, put on these cattle cars, and in some cases, depending what part of Europe, what country they came, took them 2 days to get to Auschwitz. Those cattle cars, no food, no water, no toilet facilities, 2 days, 3 days, one hole cut in the top with barbed wire for air. By the time they got to Auschwitz, about 10% of the people had expired already. They were dead. They couldn't withstand that particular travel. I took some pictures. I got them from Google. And when the people got over to that area, these were some, I made a specific, and matter of fact, I saw that picture of the U.S. Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. It has that picture. That actually, the reason that it's emotional. The Netherlands had a holding camp called Westerbork, that every Jewish person that was arrested went to Westerbork. From there, most of them went to Auschwitz and other camps. This picture, the reason that I put it up, Westerbork to Auschwitz, 1942, 1943. I know it's stupid, it's crazy, but my dad could be amongst them. That's when he was arrested. That's when he went to Auschwitz. Anyway, I took some pictures. Needless to say, when these people got there, all bedlam broke loose. I mean, kids crying, "Where's Grandma? I want to go home. What are we doing?" And people didn't know why. So that is where some of them went to. Nobody knew. That one camp alone, at any given time, would hold 135,000 prisoners. Probably more people that live in your whole area. 135,000 prisoners. They were separated in two areas. They were referred to as the area of selection. You see the tunnel there? These lines. Those lines could be a mile long because the trains just kept coming from all over Europe. And they were separated. Mostly the young men in one area, and on the other side, the old folks and people, women with babies. They were told to march forward, and there was a table with a Nazi officer pointing. He only used 2 words. Rechts, right. Links, left. If you want left, usually the younger people, they went into a slave labor camp. Most of them did not survive more than 2-3 weeks on 1 square piece of bread and a half a sip of water. The old people were told something different, and the ones with women with babies. You've been on a train. You're filthy. We got to delouse you. You got lice on you, whatever that means. They were led to an underground concrete bunker. There were several of them, a total of 6. Some of them would hold upward of 300 people, and there were several of them that would hold over 1,000 people. And they were told to you're going to take a shower. Well, everything those people went through, being pulled away from their community, having lost their husband, underfed, blah, 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 blah. A shower probably didn't sound so bad. They were given a towel before they went into this underground bunker. No panic here. And when they came into this concrete bunker, you could look up at the ceiling. There were shower heads. No panic here. After, whether it was the ones with 300 or it was the one with 1,000, they were given instructions to remove all of your clothes, man, woman, and child. Make sure the hooks that you hang your clothes on, remember the number, so that after your shower, you pick up your own clothes. After they were given those instructions, the metal door shut behind them. There's some soldiers on the rooftop emptying some canisters called Zyklon B, which is a cyanide when it comes in touch with air. All hell broke loose. People choking, people coughing, people screaming. And between 1.5 and 3 minutes, another 300 or 1,000 people lay dead. Those were the gas chambers. At the end, they had some mini tracks. And probably those that could still stand on their own 2 feet, the younger people would come out with meat hooks. And there would be areas that they would take those bodies with meat hooks. The bodies would stack 10 feet tall, a block long, in front of the crematoria. There were times that between the gas chambers and the crematoria that the Germans annihilated 4,000 bodies a day. 4,000 a day. I took some pictures when I was there. The entire camp, of course, was surrounded by high tension wires at that time. Many of those people just walked into it. Life became beyond what you could possibly imagine. And, they killed themselves. In the back, by the way, is one of the crematoria. The chimneys used to smoke 24/7. There used to be a saying I've heard of somebody that was there who survived, which is almost an oxymoron, knowing what took place there, how you survived, that there's only one way that you got into Auschwitz. That was on a cattle car. It's the only way you got out is through the chimney. I took a picture, one of the small gas chambers. These chimneys were going around the clock. As I was walking throughout, and by the way, at that camp, a very solemn place, there's like 7 million people a year that visit there, even after all these years. I saw a railroad track, and I saw 2 dark black lights, usually indicating the end of the line. The tracks didn't go beyond that. And I took a picture of it. As you can see, the old gun towers are still there. And I called it the end of the line, and I don't just mean the end of the railroad line. In that one camp alone, they murdered over 1.5 million people in this one camp alone. The Germans had over 40,000 various camps throughout Germany. They were not all death camps, slave labor, etc., etc. But they had 5 of them that were built for one use only, the purpose to annihilate. Auschwitz, of course, was the most notorious, the most biggest. There were names like Sobibor, Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, etc., etc. 6 of them that were built for just that one purpose alone. So what I want to get to now, and this is very important to me, especially when I tell the kids, in the world in which we live today, be aware of this world. The world of propaganda, misleading information to promote a particular cause or point of view. Something that, and I'm going to just say this, and it has nothing to do with what you may think. I can even make that statement. But if you have ever seen or heard this statement, if you tell a lie big enough, keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. I know what some of you are thinking. The person who said that, the person who made that statement, was a guy that was appointed by the German government as the propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels. He is the one that said that. Tell a big enough lie often enough, eventually people will believe it. So, one of the things that I mentioned to you before, when I mentioned this Werner von Braun, the scientist, I got a picture of him in his early days in the military, and then he's standing next to what he actually became more famous for. That is one engine of the 5 that were attached to the Apollo moonshot in June of 1969. That is he standing in the front. Now we get to a point that I found to be, well, I bring it up because the thoughts are there, and that is that there are people that say that this horrible event of the Holocaust never happened. The Jews made that up. They wanted to start the country of Israel, blah, 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 blah. Well, let me just make the statement. From one individual, I can tell you that it happened. But those people that say that don't, I'm going to say flat out right, they're bigots. They're racist. They may say, well, it's my opinion that it didn't happen. Well, you live in a free country, you have a right opinion, but don't make it a fact. An opinion is not a fact unless you can back it up with statistics. And if you read any history books, this so-called horrible event called the Holocaust is one of the most, and here are the 2 magic words, recorded events in history. That is the main word, recorded. Now, even to the point, and I think there's a picture on that exhibit out there. During the liberation, Dwight David Eisenhower, the commander of the D-Day forces, called the Army of the Generals. He was a 5-star general. They don't make those anymore. The last one was in 1950, was Omar Bradley, was the last 5-star general. But it was this 5-star general that went to the front of with his troops to visit the camps that were liberated because he wanted to see himself. This is Eisenhower talking to reporters. At the end of World War II, General Eisenhower, and I keep in mind he was, of course, the 34th President of the United States as well. At the end of World War II, Eisenhower made a decision to personally visit as many Nazi concentration camps as he could. The reason? To document the camps. This, to me, is amazing, thinking back of so many years ago. anticipating a time when Nazi atrocities might be denied, General Eisenhower ordered the filming, photographing of the camps. This is when he put everybody together. They had 80,000 feet of film in those days, etc., etc. So let me just say, those people who deny it face reality, folks. So let me just finish and say this, that all I'm hoping for is tolerance. We don't all pray the same, maybe not at all. We don't all look the same. We're not all bald. I know a couple of them are here. We're not all the same color, whatever it is. You don't have to love them. You know, I'm sure everybody has heard that expression, love thy neighbor. I can't stand my neighbor. But that doesn't mean that I have to kill him. As long as he does not will harm to me and to other people, just tolerate it. And the most important thing that I always emphasize with the kids, but it really holds true for anybody, is independent thought. Just because Aunt Tilly or Uncle Charlie said, these people are bad, this is good, blah, 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 blah. Look it up, find out, research it, and then formulate your own opinion. Not because Charlie says so or somebody else says so. Find out for yourself. Having said that, we'll leave it now open to question, and I want to thank you very much for your attention. Incidentally, I made mention of the fact of documentation. The Germans were excellent documenters. A very forward society. The records that they kept was one of the reasons that people have as much documentation as they have. Then the question comes up, why did they keep those records? Well, I can't challenge it, I don't know if it's true or not. One of the reasons that I've heard, because they said, we killed all the Jews. See, they were going to win the war. World War II, they were going to win. That's how we did it. We killed the Jews. I have, as an example, I should put it on the slide, signed by a doctor in German the day that my father died in Auschwitz, a camp that 1.5 million people lost their lives. And do you know how many of those documents, how they came by that? Somebody, I did not know that for many years, something that will surprise you. The reason they were capable of the documents as well as they did is because a name that all of you are familiar with, called Big Blue, IBM. The first attempt at a computerized system with holes in them or whatever you call it was a division. I'm not talking about what we know as IBM, of course, but that was one of the reasons they could make punch cards. That helped them tremendously. And I even have a list, I'll put arrows to it, that shows the transport of my uncle, my grandparents, and my dad to Auschwitz, the day that he got there and the day they killed him. Here's an interesting picture that I just show you, and like I say, I should be putting that on there. When we took that trip to Europe, and when we met with this bank manager, I knew that Klaus and Roefina had a daughter, but I never met her. When she was 15, she moved away, became a au pair, somebody's help in their home. And I told the bank manager, he says, yeah, I know they had a daughter, but I don't know if she's still alive. I don't even know where she is. I said, you got to find her. You got to find her, because that would have been my connection to the parents. I wrote the guy twice, never got over a 6 months period, never got an answer. After about 7 or 8 months, I get a letter from him, say, I found her and her family. She lives in the city of Delft with the family. Well, he gave me the address, he gave me the phone number. Well, there was no way in heck that I possibly could call, not to mention the fact that growing up on the farm, 99% of the people in the Netherlands speak better English than I do now. But, in the farmland, many times they don't. And I know that her name was Lena, Lena, that she wouldn't speak English. But there's no way I could call and not fall apart. So I had a very good physician friend who's from the Netherlands, and his sister came here when she was, in her late 20s. And I wrote a 4-page letter in English, and I had her translated into Dutch, and I mailed it to her. We had a conversation, writing conversation, for about 6 years. In 2001, my wife and I went to Europe, went to Delft, and I corresponded over there. And they hired a little cafe. And I'd never met the daughter, but all of them, 4 generations back from the post, knew about Mom and myself. It had just been passed on in the family, and they were proud. They were proud. And we took everybody to lunch. Then I got a photograph from Lena where she went in, 1999. She went back to Mackinga, and the cave was still there. We were there in 92, and this is a picture of her in front, and I just love that pensive look in her face. I mean, it was still there. Whether it's still there now or not, I have no idea. So anyway, you guys have been kind enough. If you have any questions, when we're docents at the Museum of Flight, we always volunteer, we give a tour, and we always tell people, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. If we don't have the answer, we'll make it up. No, not here. But if any of you have any questions, and there's nothing too sensitive or whatever it is, feel free, and I'll answer it to the best of my ability. May not be the answer you like, but I'm going to come over because...
Wonderful information. If anyone's had the opportunity to be in Washington, D.C. at the Holocaust Museum, that's how we found our relatives. They had a script, and these were Holocaust survivors who had made contributions to the Holocaust Museum in Washington. And I had just discovered that my father had been born in Poland, and his name was Nabozny. And here on this script it says, Ari Nabozny. We got the number and called and discovered he'd been in a concentration camp in Poland at age 5. It was the Russians who liberated him, sent him later to Israel.
Right. Yeah, it was the Russians actually that liberated Auschwitz. And if any of you've heard you've seen pictures of people that had the tattoo, anybody that had the tattoo, you can be assured 100% they were in Auschwitz. None of the other camps did that. And I got a letter. There's a huge museum in Auschwitz. And I wrote them giving my father's name, my grandparents' name, where my dad was born, And about a month and a half, 2 months later, I get a letter in Polish. I don't read Polish, but I could see where it had Simon Metzelaar and then a number KL, Kampflager, the German word, with his tattoo number. And when it came to my grandparents, it said no information. Get this. In the Netherlands, there is an organization, an office. It is like after the war, people, after all so many years, want to trace down relatives, whatever. It's a research organization. And I wrote them, same thing, my father, my grandparents. They came up, wrote me the same thing about the day that my dad got to Auschwitz, the day that he died. And then it says, as far as your grandparents, they were, which I didn't know, and I only found this out a couple of years ago, they were all of 58 years old, too old for slave labor, off the train into the gas chamber, no tattoo, no prisoner. Killed them right away because there was no use for them. And that's why Auschwitz didn't have a record of them, because the old people, or babies, no record. Somebody raised their hand back there. I got to come over here. I'm an old man.
Do you know why your family didn't leave Belgium?
I'm sorry?
Do you know why your parents didn't want to leave Belgium when they knew the occupation was coming?
The Netherlands?
Yes. Or, I'm sorry, yes, the Netherlands.
How do you leave?
Well, I don't know. I mean, in some countries people left. I was just curious.
No, you could not leave. You could not leave. You had no passports. How do you leave?
Okay.
Couldn't be done. They did everything possible to corral as many of their subjects, if you will, make it impossible. Anybody else?
Yeah,
I made that statement to my friend over here before. There's been several times where I've been doing the talk in front of a high school, and I have 300-400 kids. And when I get to the point of saying, anything goes, feel free to answer a question, I'm staring at about 400, 800 eyes. I'm not going to raise my hand. And then I just tell them, I said, look, I'll give you another 10 seconds. And I said, it's a great deal of expense to myself. I hired a couple of security guards at the door, and nobody gets out until you look. I said, no. And then, okay, yeah. Matter of fact, I got some security for a few people. No, if you have any questions, feel free. If not, like I say, thank you for the opportunity to talk. I'm a radiology technician. Yeah. So anyway, another question.
The hiding place, right?
Pick on the minority every time. Scapegoating. Because prior to World War II, the entire Jewry world of the world was 2.9%. Yeah, they're going to take over the world, of course. Please, come on. As it is right now, it's not much over that. It is scapegoating. Today it's a Jew. Hey, how about this? How about going back to the Roman days? In the Colosseum, throw the Christians to the lions. Hey, say ridiculous. And then you ride the wave. Yeah, that sounds good. It lets out my shortcomings, my frustrations, whatever the hell it is. There's no simple answer, quite honestly. But it's always a minority. Always a minority. Yes?
Can you give a statement, in my opinion, to your question, why did Hitler target the Jews? He wanted a perfect race. Look at what's happening in our country today. In the last couple of weeks, I get so frustrated and angry. I am an educated person. I am 79. I was born in 1943 when Anne Frank's family went into hiding. I graduated from high school in 1961. I heard nothing about the Holocaust. And through my background in teaching and reading, I have become more and more frustrated with the situation that we're in. We are in the Pacific Northwest. I have a son that lives in Seattle. We are the hotbed for Holocaust deniers, LGBTQ, whatever. No tolerance. Look at our legislature. If you voted for any of those legislators who want to deny people rights, shame on you. Shame on you. Investigate. Find out what your politicians stand for. Not just if they're bringing money in, but morally. What do they stand for? And if we don't, we're going to end up the same way just before.
In keeping what you're saying, in 1955, Albert Einstein made a statement that he not only feared those people who created ill will to others, what he feared most, those people who stood by and did nothing.
How many people nowadays, how many people in power stand by and won't stand up and say something against January 6th? You know, stand up, talk to your kids. Those of you parents that brought kids tonight, kudos to you. And like you said, it's our responsibility to encourage people to come and look at the
Educate people.
Yeah. I'm sorry, it's just.
No, thank you for saying that. Now you all may go. It's potty time.